Good morning, Americans. This is your favorite alien on the morning of Monday, December 5th, 2022. Sitting in for Paul Harvey this morning. Stand by for the rest of the story. Well, the rest of the story being Christmas season, I guess would be Scrooge with a question mark. And the reason it's a question mark is we all ask ourselves, who is Ebenezer Scrooge? Well, you got to go back to the author, Charles John Hoffman Dickens, who had a unique way of looking at things, but he also had questions and ways of finding out, especially in a time that he lived in. You must remember, he was born around 1812 and he died in 1870. And he wrote A Christmas Carol in 1843, just inside the Victorian age, who had started in 1837 with the ascent of Queen Victoria. But his youth was spent in the 1820s and 30s, long before Queen Victoria. And the way Christmas was looked at in those days, very few people celebrated Christmas. It was not like today, where you look at Christmas as what it is today. It was more of a religious significance and only for a few hours. Most Britishers at the time celebrated what they called Twelfth Night, which was January 6th, instead of December 25th. And the way that Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol, based on the 1820s, and 30s, which everybody assumes that that's the basis of his 1843 novel. I look at it in a different way because of the way Charles Dickens was. Charles Dickens always tried to get his hands on anything he could to read to form his stories. He wrote 5 Christmas stories, and the first one was 1843's A Christmas Carol. And he fashioned it in London. And people are saying, oh yeah, but the fashioning with the cold and everything else would go back to the little ice age of 1816, the wonder. When England had a lot of snow and very cold winters. I mean, winters that you wouldn't expect in Britain today. I mean, they were cold, icy, and very snowy. And most of the people, a lot of people died because they couldn't keep themselves warm. Okay? Think of Christmas that way. But look at the Christmas Carol, the way that Charles Dickens wrote it in 1843. Especially Scrooge. Now, you must admit that he took some poetic license here, okay? But Scrooge, I mean, he was, Dickens, he was infatuated with America, i.e., you guys here, the United States. Poor guy. Oh, boy, do I feel sorry for him. But he was infatuated with him, with you guys, back in the 1820s and 30s. And can you imagine when he was reading those Eastern newspapers at the time? And it took a long time to get to Britain, so he probably was a few months behind when he got the papers there and everything in there. But one paper that he probably got, and my sources, not 100% confirmed, so I have to put a little disclaimer here, okay? That he got what you would call, what was it called in those days? Oh man, it was a paper out of Wilmington, Delaware. The American Adventurer and the Delaware Advertiser, I believe was the name of it. It was published a short time between 1825 and 32 when it went out of business. I think it became part of the Bloomington Gazette, but I'm not sure. I got to check that. But anyway, in 1826, that was the only confirmed thing that I have to put a thing out there on the death of Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson was probably somebody that Charles Dickens would want to know a lot about because he was an interesting character. And the more you look at Thomas Jefferson, with his faults that he had, and he had a lot of good qualities. I mean, he created the United States, a Declaration of Independence. I mean, he was also an inventor that you guys still have. Windows that you guys use today, well, he invented that. He invented a lot of other things. Nobody gave him credit for it, but he did. But he was also a Trumpy guy because he had Trump's type of attitude, and it cost him big time. He hated government, and he didn't think that the United States should be part of the government, okay? And in England, you must admit that the crown was it. Even though the Glorious Revolution had happened almost a century and a half before the birth of Charles Dickens, the British, while still not being as civilized as you know them today, were better off than the Americans. And when Dickens talks about the plights of the people of London, you got to look at it a different way and look at the plights of the people of America in the 1820s and 30s. They were bad. I mean, you had severe economic depressions that happened in the 1820s and 30s, and the people, they couldn't rely on anything. Government was non-existent for most of them. Heck, government's non-existent for most of them today, isn't it? But the government was trying, and this is what Thomas Jefferson was lamenting. He hated the Federalists with George Washington and John Adams because they were implementing a system that today became the welfare system. And I'm using it here today because I only got Social Security and that's it. Because pensions went the way of the thing. You know, my generation in the 70s, we got caught in the middle of no man's land. You guys that are in my position know it, right? Yeah. Well, and Dickens was aware of this. I mean, he liked Thomas Jefferson. It was one of his guys. And Thomas Jefferson was a very nasty guy, whether you like him or not. And that's not demeaning what he did, and he was the third president. But when he died penniless and owing $107,000. And if you look at the way that Scrooge is constructed from Charles Dickens, it's like being Thomas Jefferson, a good guy. Thomas Jefferson was a nice guy during the American Revolution. He was as contrary to what he became after, night and day. And same as Scrooge, he became night and day. Afterwards, he was concerned about, as Scrooge would say, "Here comes 25th of December, so you can pick my pocket." And that was the main concern of Thomas Jefferson, getting picked on his pocket. And one of the concerns he had was from President Washington in his first term and his second term, especially the first term, when he set aside the Northwest territories acquired from Britain and gave parcels of land to the Revolutionary War veterans as part of repayment. That irked Thomas Jefferson. They don't deserve that. They didn't earn it. And he would be very nasty about that part. Something they don't tell you in school, do they? And he became so anti-federalist and so anti-government that today you live in what you called a Hamiltonian, Jeffersonian world. The Jeffersonian world can be people like Donald J. Trump and the extremist Republicans to the right. Yeah. And the Hamiltonians, well, Joseph B. Biden, let's create this, $1 billion for this, $2 trillion for that. We don't know how we're going to pay for it, but let's have it. Yeah. That was the dilemma that you had in the 1820s in America. And the dilemmas that you see in 1843's Ebenezer Scrooge. Now, can you imagine on the first Ghost, that was Ebenezer Scrooge in the Thomas Jefferson in the 1770s and early 80s. The middle one in the middle 80s. But by 1794, he was the old Scrooge. Yeah. Till his death in 1826. But what probably noticed Thomas Jefferson and Charles Dickens the most was about a year before his death, Thomas Jefferson started looking at himself and saying, "The Grim Reaper is coming for me. And I have done absolutely nothing." So he created the Ghost of Christmas Futures for his character Scrooge as the conscience that was building in Thomas Jefferson in 1825-26. And when Thomas Jefferson died on July 4th, 1826, if you read the Scrooge, the movies don't give it justice because they only give it maybe 2 minutes as it. But if you look at Scrooge doing Christmas Future and the ghost, who doesn't say a thing, he's just a black ghost. And he's pointing at him, and the people are taking curtains and everything around in the house. And you had a auctioneer auctioning off everything, pennies on the dollar that they could sell. And people taking the stuff that people didn't want, like curtains, beds, and everything, and they're gone. China, some people didn't want to China, so they were taking that too. I mean, you saw that in the movie for a little bit, not much. But if you read A Christmas Carol, then you'll see how deep Charles Dickens gets into this. Thus, he's using Thomas Jefferson as Ebenezer Scrooge. And to me, that is both a curse and a testament to Charles Dickens that he's putting Thomas Jefferson up as a redemption guy, which Thomas Jefferson did. And a lot of people don't understand Thomas Jefferson. He tried to redeem himself when he died. In his last words, you misunderstand him when he said, "John Adams still lives." because he never got to say, "I am sorry, John." And that's probably what he took to his grave. He was trying to redeem everything he had done from 1794 to his death. Charles Dickens must have understood that when he wrote A Christmas Carol and put that in Ebenezer Scrooge. Except that in Ebenezer Scrooge, he redeemed him. Something that, for the most part, probably Thomas Jefferson was trying to look at. And if you read the story of Monticello between 1826 and 1923, it's a disgusting story of Monticello, okay? And during the time of the life of Charles Dickens, he saw it all there. He even came to America and he probably visited, although nobody's recorded it, but I'm sure he did. What was left of Monticello, and it wasn't a very good sight at the time when he came in. It was deplorable. They had cows in the living room, pigs in the kitchen. Yeah, it was disastrous. Overgrown fields. Oh, yeah. I can imagine how it looked back then. But you see, Americans, and this is what I'm trying to say, that Charles Dickens, somewhat unlike you Americans, he was looking at the America of the 1830s when he was saying, "Where there's no workhouses for the kids." And you guys didn't do anything for the kids in America until the early 20th century. That's a disgrace. England did it. They did it as early as the 1870s where they started working on that. The orphanage started getting a lot better. American orphanage were a disaster. And their county homes, even to the 1970s, were still a disaster. Sitting in for Paul Harvey, this is your favorite alien saying, now you know the rest of the story. Good day.